I would have to imagine that everyone was pretty big back then, because the human DNA had not degraded so much, right? People lived longer, right, at the time, right? God didn't quite put the ban on human longevity, right? The 120-year ban hadn't happened yet. Yeah, so it seems reasonable to assume that they would have been taller, would have been stronger, would have been healthier, would have looked better, all that kind of stuff. Daniel says, I think in Enoch, Adam was a giant. Oh, interesting. In the Enochian literature. That's interesting. He wasn't a prophet, like in the Religion of Peace. They think he was a prophet. Prophet Adam. All right, so let's look here, relating more to the sin of Cham. So here we have this writing. This is from the Apostolic Writings, from the Besorat Yochanan. That's the Gospel of John, the Good News of John, chapter 5, verse 14. It says, Meta tauta, yuriske auton ho Jesus, and to hiedo. So after this is after the healing. Yeshua healed a guy who couldn't walk. He healed him. And the guy went away, and Yeshua disappeared into the crowd. Okay. Then, Yuriske, he found him. This is like, you know the story of Archimedes? The king wanted Archimedes to... the king had bought a golden crown from a certain merchant. And the king had doubts if the merchant had ripped him off, if it was the right content of gold, or if it was an alloy, right? Was it really pure gold like he said it was, or close to pure gold? I can't remember the details. And he asked Archimedes, since Archimedes was like a great engineer and scientist type, he says, find out if this is really the content of gold that he says it was. Like, if it's, let's just go with pure gold for now to make the story easier. And so Archimedes is thinking about it, he doesn't have a solution, and then one day he's in the bathtub. And he's in the bathtub, and he lowers himself in the bathtub a bit, and the water level rises. And then he's reported to have cried out, Eureka! Eureka! Eureka means I found. I have found in Greek. Eureka. It's a perfect form, right? So I found. And so here we have the same. The idea is he understood that if you put the same weight in gold in a bathtub or in a pail of water or whatever, the height that the water level would increase would be the same as when you put the crown of the same weight in, if it was the same content of gold, you see? Because this has to do with density of matter and how heavy gold is and all that kind of stuff versus space it takes up. So he discovered it by taking a bath. So Eureka! So that's how you can remember the Greek word I found. So here it's Yeriske, he found him. So Yeshua found him, meaning the guy had been healed, in the temple. Kaepin auto, and he said to him, Ide, behold, hugieys gegonis, you have become whole, you become healed. This maps to the Hebrew word shalem more than any other word. Shalem or tam, right? Shalem, like we're told that the altar should be built from avanim, shalamim, right? From perfect stones, some uncut stones, unhewed stones, right? Complete. They're complete. It's kind of like doctors today, they might talk about holistic program, right? Holistic, complete healing. So that's what he says. Oh, look, you're whole now. You're whole. You're shalem. Meketa amartane ina mecharion soy ti genitai. So he says, do not sin more. Don't do sin. Don't do some sin. So that something worse does not occur to you, right? So there's an interesting concept here. He's telling him, do not... Oh, here, I actually have a Hebrew translation that's interesting, too. For anyone who wants to look at that, this is the Delitzsch translation, which is more like biblical Hebrew. So for the Hebrew students, I've highlighted the yellow here, do not sin more. In Hebrew, al-tosiyf lachato, do not continue on sinning, right? So the reason this verse came to my mind is I was thinking about how absurd the whole situation is. This family, the vnei Noach, the sons of Noach, they have endured the worst catastrophe any human being has ever witnessed in the history of humanity. They've witnessed all humans being exterminated. Every race, every nation, they're all exterminated. They all die. Maybe Atlantis, you know, the stories of Atlantis, maybe this comes from that, right? Everybody dies. Everybody died. They've seen all the animals that died. They know that God is real because their crazy loony dad was building an escape vessel for a century, right? So they know he's real. They know all these things are real. And yet, what happens after the great purification of the world, the great purification, the removal of all of the Hebrew Hamas, all of the injustice that was in the world? What happens? Noah gets drunk, and his son possibly rapes him, possibly castrates him, possibly rapes his wife. The sin has been wiped out, and now something even worse is going to happen. Rather to Canaan and his descendants. They're going to end up falling into idolatry. Right? They're going to end up falling into having to be wiped out by the Israelis. And so here would have been a good time for them to take stock in the Messiah's teaching. Don't sin anymore. Don't continue in sin, or else something worse is going to happen to you. That's the warning here. Al-toסיף לחטא פן תאונה אליך רעה גדולה מזאת. Some kind of bad thing, worse, like bigger, literally it says in the Hebrew translation from this. A worse evil will happen to you. So when someone had an ailment, like they once were able to walk and now they can't anymore, oftentimes it's considered that maybe they did some kind of sin that invited that curse. Not always, right? Sometimes things happen. Sometimes our teeth are set on edge because of the sins of our parents. You get some bad genetics and it's easier to be an alcoholic, for example, because your grandparents were, or whatever. This happens. But the idea is that there's some sin somewhere that might have caused it to happen. Alfredo comments, or let me back up. Let me see if there's a comment before yours. I'll get to yours. Possibly, Dr. Vera says, if she was impregnated by Nephalim, she must have been delivered while in the ark. Maybe. Right? Who knows what the gestation period is for Nephalim? They're a mixed race being, right? Maybe the mother has to, maybe the fetus gestates longer. Who knows? But, do you remember we had that one claim that Cham and his wife had sex while on the ark? And remember we learned that they weren't supposed to, that God didn't want anyone to be having sex in the ark? It's kind of like when we have a fast, right? There's great destruction going on. There's a great covering. Remember I mentioned that the Septuagint translated when he covered the holes in the deep, the lattice in the deep, that the Greek word was related to the same word that's used for atoning for sins, like covering over sins, right? That there was a covering that happened. And when we go into Yom Kippur, we're not supposed to eat, we're not supposed to drink, and we're not supposed to have sexual relations with our spouses, right? So there seems to be kind of a, when something bad is happening, i.e. death of an animal, etc., purging out the wickedness of sin, we're not supposed to be having sexual relations. Yet Cham, we're told, was having sex with his wife. So maybe, I like the idea of it being Cham's wife that was pregnant. Yeah. Let's see, okay. Alfredo says, according to the apostolic writings, because of Yeshua hanging on a stick, we are not under the curse. Rabbi, is that correct? Or yeah, correct. Not under the curse of death being permanent, right? So we have the legal dictum that the soul which sins shall die, right? The soul that sins must die. The life force belonging to the person who sins must die. And that still happens. But because Yeshua HaMashiach, who was sinless, died, he was able to defeat death. That's why he's called in the Greek the protokos to nekron, the firstborn of the dead, meaning that he defeated death. Right? He died and came back to life, raised up by God directly, so that none of us have to have the permanence of death anymore. Right? It doesn't have an effect on whether Torah stands or not. It has an effect on whether the punishment for sinning is eternal death or not. The one who continues in his sins, then yes, they will know what's called the second death. It's called in the Greek the second death, right, which is being cast into the lake of fire, where even the immortal spirit gets destroyed. Okay. Dr. De Vera says the Hebrew yetser hara was not wiped out by the flood. The flood was kind of damage control, a term we use in severe trauma to the abdominal organs. Yeah, that's a good point. I think so. Especially when we consider that one of the large reasons for the flood was the presence of the Nephalim among man, right? Their wicked presence in accelerating humanity's decline. because they hated humanity. Shoshana says, so in Adonai's mind, it's back to square one, there's evil again. Not exactly. If we're focusing on the problem of the giants, the mixed bnei Elohim, sons of God, mixed with the benot Adam, the daughters of man, then not really. The giants are now largely contained in a certain area. Who knows how spread across the earth they were before. And if you read in the book of Joshua, near the end of the book, it gives us a report. Throughout the book, we have all these battles against the Anakim, which means the giants, right? At the end of the book, we have a report that Joshua had killed all of the Anakim, all of the giants, except in Gath. And later, that one, King David deals with. Goliath gets dealt with by David. So it seems like it's more than just, yeah, I like the term damage control, but it's not that we're back to square one. We have instead the issue of the Nephalim, their influence has been reduced, right? Most of them have been wiped out. You know, we have the story of Og holding onto the ark and Noah's feeding him, or what we talked about, the Midrash about, that Daniel brought up about Cham's wife being impregnated by one of the Nephalim, or there's a Midrash that suspected Noah's wife. Noah said, looks at her, hey, say, why are you pregnant? We didn't sleep together. And, you know, the Midrash goes on, oh, sure, you remember the time, blah, 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 you were drunk. And so there's, whether these Midrashim are correct, you can tell that the sages are trying to solve the problem. Where did the Nephilim come from again? If they got wiped out by the flood, where did they come from? So I think the pregnancy on board answers a lot of that. So we're not back to square one. There is evil. The flood's purpose, we're never told that the purpose is to stop evil. It's not, the purpose isn't to return us to the Garden of Eden. Right? That's not the purpose. The purpose of the flood was to wipe out the Nephilim, reducing their influence, and God was provoked because of Hamas, injustice. Right? So it's reducing the level of injustice again, resetting the clock on injustice. Right, so at least you're not starting out in a world that's full of violence or injustice. The word can mean either thing. Okay? Yeah, nice comments. Thanks everybody for chiming in. I want to read to you from an extra biblical book. This is from Yeshua ben Sira. So Yeshua ben Sira, usually in English called Sirach. Yeshua ben Sira is a deuterocanonical book, so some denominations like the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholics, they have it in their Bible. It's a Jewish book, but we do not consider it on the level of the Bible, but yet it's still classified as wisdom literature. So Yeshua, son of Sira, he writes, "Have you sinned, my child? Do so no more, but ask forgiveness for your past sins. Flee from sin as from a snake, for if you approach sin, it will bite you. Its teeth are lion's teeth and can destroy human lives. All lawlessness, all Torahlessness is like a two-edged sword. There is no healing for the wound it inflicts." So there's some great advice there by Yeshua ben Sira that we should flee from sin. If we have sinned, the proper reaction is asking for forgiveness, right? Making teshuvah, and then fleeing from the approaching sin. As Yeshua says, go forth and sin no more. Clear negative example from Cham. All injustice has been washed away. The world has a new beginning. We even have that word hinted at. We have this hinted at when it says, Vayachel Noach, Ish ha'adama, Vayata et ha'karmel. So then Noach began, that Yachel, Vayachel, he began to be a farmer. Right? So this hint about new beginnings, both for the earth and what happens with farming, and also for Noah, which is a symbol of all of humanity. So the sins have been washed away. The time of death is gone. Yeah, Shoshana, there is evil again. Yeah, absolutely. Evil is always present as long as man has free will. There's the potential for evil is always there, right? This is why it's a mistake to put everything on Adam, right? the fall, the fall, the fall. A little born baby is not sinful, right? So the idea that an aborted fetus would go to hell, right, or a little infant would go to hell, is just ludicrous. This is not how God acts. He judges people according to their knowledge. So a 5-year-old who's struck down with some disease or an unfortunate accident is not destined to hellfire. That makes no sense. That is not our tradition. That's not the way that we have ever viewed this in our culture. Instead, the child is not at the age of consent yet. They have not learned to choose good from evil. That happens at 12 and 13. For a girl, it's around 12, right? It's different for every person. For a boy, it's around 13. After that, they're accountable for their actions before the Holy One. Although remember, we learned that in the days of Noah. Chizkuni, I think, said that it was 100. Right? All future generations will stem from a small group, and you are one of them. Can you imagine the feeling, being in Noah's family? I mean, it would be impossible to not have gratitude every day, I think. Everything is new. Everything has been made new. Which echoes, of course, into the teachings of Messiah. I just can't get into all those things. How can we apply this negative example of Cham into our own lives? The pattern that's presented here in the Torah portion, the pattern of God intervening, God making a covenant with your family, or allowing you to become part of a family with whom God has made a covenant. Right? Having this precious knowledge that so few people have, being members of that family that so few people have. Most families are going to die, just like in the days of Noah. Men were eating and drinking, they were marrying, and ladies were being given in marriage. Like nothing's going to happen when a horrible instant destruction was on the way. And it's the same today. Not by flood, but when the Lord returns, it will be mayhem. People will hate him. It's funny, a lot of times atheists will say, oh, if he would only show me a miracle, if he would show me, if I could see with my own eyes, then I would believe. Maybe at first. But our memories are not perfect things. The mind is kind of tricky how it works with memory. Over time, memories permeate, they mutate, they change. And if you surround yourself with wicked people, you'll be pushing the holy memories farther, and they'll be mutating further, and you'll be trying to find reasons, scientific explanations to explain the miracle that you saw. Or you'll just forget it. How many people, if you think about it, has it ever happened that you're just thinking sometime and then you remember a miracle that God did for you? He saved your life, for example, right? Or something happened which was eerie. It just couldn't be chance that the things happened the way they happened to take you down a certain path. And then you remember it one day and you think, oh my gosh, how could I have forgotten this? Because when it happened to you, you said, surely I will always remember this. Surely all my days I'll be grateful to God for what happened. But we forget. Just like the wicked Cham. He was one of the few persons saved from annihilation. One of the few creatures saved. This is the pattern we have to be careful of in ourselves. Maybe not going as far as Cham, but losing the gratitude. Losing the motivating memory that keeps us on the path of righteousness. That keeps us eager to learn how to not do sin anymore. That verb, the way it's translated in the Hebrew, kachaTo, you saw in the Delitzsch translation, this means not to do accidental sins anymore. It can mean that, right? Which means we have to study the word to know what sin is. As Rav Shaul says, if it were not for the Torah, I would not have known what sin is. I wouldn't have known. He's an intelligent man. He's an educated man. He has a very high level even of Greek, which is not his native language. And so people, they think that Paul's talking about like the so-called moral code, right? Don't murder, don't steal. And I've said this before, but I feel led to say it again right now. If you go to Japan today, if you go to Tokyo and you watch a shop corner or you watch the street, here is what you will not see. You will not see theft. You will not see murder. You will not see violent crime. Right? So these things that people think Shaul, that what they think Paul is talking about, when he says, if not for the Torah, I would not have known what sin is, he's not talking about those. In another place, he talks about those, right? The blueprint of God, which is in every person, where we have kind of an innate understanding of right and wrong. We know that it's wrong to punch someone in the face, right? We know that's wrong. We know it's wrong to steal. We know it's wrong to rape. We know it's wrong to murder. You don't need the Torah for this, because being made demut Elohim, being made in the likeness of God, that is part of our characteristic already. Even if you're over in Japan and you never heard of the Bible, you never heard of the God of Israel, even so, that's imprinted on you, right? I mean, there's times in history where people go a little bit further under a certain wickedness, but for the most part, people understand that you cannot have a lasting society which tolerates theft, murder, etc., at the whims of an individual. So what is Paul talking about? He's talking about the things that are not obvious. The Sabbath day, for example. Someone's microphone's on, please mute. It is not obvious. Here, I hit mute all. It's not obvious at all that the Sabbath is special. How could someone over in Japan, and I'm sorry if you're from Japan, I'm not picking on you, it's just, I'm actually giving a compliment to the civilization. They really have their stuff together for a nation that is not largely Judeo-Christian. Right? They really have it figured out, the way that they should behave towards one another, often. I respect it that there's only 6 murders a year. That's incredible. I mean, that's one day in Los Angeles. 6 murders. Easily. And so, the Torah is saying, Paul is saying, I wouldn't know that I should wear tzitzit. I wouldn't have known that. How could you possibly guess the clothing should be a certain way, right? Or I wouldn't have known that there should be, a wedding contract, that there's a contract, a marriage contract that's given to a woman to protect her in case the man decides to dump her later, that she's got money she's taken care of, right? How could she know that? How could he know that? How could you know? I wouldn't have known that it's wrong to charge interest to people. If you loan money to someone, it's wrong to make them pay back more than what you loaned. How could you know that? It just seems logical. I can't use my money for now, so you got to make it worth my while, so give me some interest, right? Give me some neshech in Hebrew, some bites, some little bites. But the Torah makes it clear. The Torah tells us there are certain seasons, there's a certain day called the Sabbath day, there's certain food that you're not supposed to eat, because God doesn't want someone who's in his likeness to be consuming something that is unclean, spiritually unclean, right? Etc. So, the example in our own lives, we cannot be like Cham. Instead, we can have gratitude, and we seek out the learning so we do not do a kachaTo, Hebrew kachaTo, an accidental sin, something that we're ignorant of. Someone's microphone keeps coming on. You really got to be careful, guys. I have to keep hitting mute all, and it's a bit distracting. And here, yes, who is it? I'm going to have to call out your name in a second. It keeps happening. Let me see. Who is it? Okay, hit mute. Okay. Caller number 4. Whoever you are, your microphone is on. Caller 04. Please mute your microphone. I keep muting, but you're turning it back on. Maybe you're leaning on the button by accident? Not to embarrass you. It's good your name's not there. Okay, let's hope it stays off now. Okay, so here. And I want to finish up with another saying from the Messiah. So this slide is called Be Perfect. And this is a quote from Yeshua. See, it's in red, right? We like to have Yeshua's letters in red. So this is from Matityahu, chapter 5, verse 48. That's Matthew 5, verse 48. And it says, Eseste un humes telioi. Hoso pater humon ho uranios telios estin. So this is like a command here, a plural command. It's to all the listeners, anybody reading it ever. And what it's interesting. It's kind of like the first statement made by the Father in the book of Genesis. When the Father says Yehi, he says Yehi in Hebrew. Yehi, if you look over here, upper left, Yehi, as we saw in the first Parsha, exist. It means exist. Exist with an exclamation point. Or it means be. Be with an exclamation point. Be. Of course, he says be light, right? Be light, exist light. Here's the Greek equivalent. Yeshua is saying be. So, vayihyu would be the plural of the Hebrew. Pardon me, vayihyu, then yourself Tellui. So this word, I want to look at this word. It's quite interesting how it maps to the Hebrew. If you look in the Septuagint to see how we translate the Hebrew Tanakh into Greek, this word, teleus, comes from shalem. 5 times it's shalem. 1 time it's shalom. I didn't put up all the 1 times, right? Shalom 1 time, shalem 5 times. 4 times it's tamim. So shalem is intact, untouched, complete. Let's focus on complete here. Complete. Go back. Sorry. I have my glove, but for some reason it didn't like the pen. It didn't like how I moved the pen. Okay? Be complete. Be whole. Be whole. Be undivided. Remember the teaching, no man can serve 2 masters, right? Let Adonai be your only master. The other Hebrew word that translates into this word here, this teluios, is tamim, which is complete. Again, complete. We have a common theme here, right? Unscathed, intact, blameless, without fault, free of blemish, right? The sacrifices had to be tamim. Nothing wrong with them. Honesty or integrity it can mean 4 times. And twice it's tam, which is really a very closely related word. Complete or perfect. We're told that Jacob was an ish tam. He was a perfect man, a complete man. Yeah, but see, we have this common theme, complete. Complete. So it seems like a tall order when the English translation says, be perfect. As the Father, as your Father who is in heaven, perfect is, right? Estin, like Spanish, este. But I would recommend, instead we go with the Hebrew understanding, shalem, tamim, tam. Yes, it can mean perfect, but in context, the preponderance is one of these other meanings. So let's go with complete. Let's go with whole. King David, he represents in the Psalms how his soul has been damaged, injured by sinning, right? And we have the Yedid Nefesh before the Kabbalat Shabbat on Fridays. Yedid Nefesh, Avarachamim. So the beloved of my soul, merciful Father, right? So it goes on to say that, please heal her. My soul has been damaged, right? She's been hurt because of sin. Sinning damages the soul, because you remember the axiom, the soul that sins must die, right? So the soul gets injured through sin. The life force, the part which dies with the body when it dies. We're given a new soul in the resurrection. So we have a commandment, a teaching from Messiah here, that we are, instead of continuing in sin, we are to have a higher ideal, to be shalem, which through Gezerah Shava makes me think of the stones of the altar. That the commandment in the Torah for building the altar is that you're not supposed to take a blade on it. You're not supposed to cut the stone. They are unhewn stones. Each stone must be an even shelema, right? An uncut stone. It's complete. It's untouched. It's uncorrupted. Unruined by human hands. Shoshana asks regarding Japan if it's more orderly in that sense than Israel. Yeah, I think so. To be fair, I've never visited Japan. I only read about it, right? So, but in Israel we have all kinds of elements, right? I mean, 20% of Israelis are not Jews, right? So 1 out of 5 of our citizens, even if all the Jews behave well, which we don't all behave well, but even if we did all behave well, there's still 1 out of 5 people who are not Jews, right? So Arabs, 1 out of 5 are Arabs, right? And so that can be either Christians or Muslims, right? So we're certainly not. I don't think it's actually when you talk to older Israelis before the Russian immigration, they kind of talk. They'll tell you about how peaceful, aside from terrorism, right? There was no murder, there was no rape. You never heard of prostitution. You never heard of thieves, right? You never heard of all this stuff. But when the Russians immigrated, the mafia came in with them as well, and so you have all these things now too. So even though you had 1 million plus Russian Jews coming in, because they came from communist countries, predominantly a communist country, right? The Soviet Union, They left a godless society, a society which teaches there's no God. So a lot of them, they were ethnically Jews, but they were not religiously Jews. You understand? Whereas those who had been there before, a lot of them were religious, right? And then so even if you grew up on a kibbutz, you still were surrounded by the Judeo-ethic, so to speak. Dr. De Vera says, complete or teleos in context is to do good on the good and bad guys. Do a complete job, just like Adonai. Well put. And I want to complete today by reading you these verses from the Haftarah, from our Torah reading today. So the Haftarah starts with Isaiah 49, verse 9. And I'm just including 4 verses for you. And it says, to say to the prisoners, come out, to those in darkness. Oh, okay. And what does that mean, to those in darkness? Reading here from this book called Outside the Bible, Ancient Jewish Writings Related to Scripture, Commentary, Volume 2, this page. It says that to set you free from darkness, darkness is a common Hebrew figure for prison. And he gives some other verses. In Mishnaic Hebrew as well, from darkness. And of course this maps well to sinful life. We are imprisoned to our sin. And when we slip up and we continue living in sin, even after we've been rescued from the flood, even after we've been rescued from the death that's outside the door, crouching, waiting for us, we are putting ourselves back into darkness. We're pulling the wool over our eyes, and we're entering into slavery again. So to those in darkness, to those imprisoned, show yourselves. They will feed along the paths, and all the high hills will be their pastures. They will be neither hungry nor thirsty, neither scorching wind nor sun will strike them. For he who has mercy on them will lead them and guide them to springs of water. Sound like Psalm 23, right? I will turn all my mountains into a road. My highways will be raised up. There they come, some from far away, some from the north, some from the west, and some from the land of Sinim, which is like where China is. Sing, heaven, rejoice, O earth. Break out in song, O you mountains, for Adonai is comforting his people, having mercy on his own who have suffered. There's a comment here. Dr. De Vera writes, kingdom of darkness, for he rescued us from the domain of darkness. I like that, the domain of darkness, and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. This is NASB translation. This is the letter to the congregation in Colossus, chapter 1, verse 13 through 14. Very nice. Thanks for adding that, Dr. De Vera. It's a great place to conclude. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, Todah lecha l'toratecha. Na'im lanu likro et divrecha. Na'im lanu lilmod et kol hadavar asher natata lanu. Our Father, we're so grateful for your Torah. We enjoy studying your word. We enjoy studying every single word. Ken yiratzon ki titenna et ruach lekach al amcha asher shomeim et koli achshav. May it be your will that you put a spirit of lekach, of deep learning, on everyone who hears my voice now. Stir us up that we might really learn how to avoid sin. We might really learn exactly what the little sins are even, so we can avoid them, so that we can do what your Son, the Messiah, taught to the individual who had been healed and was able to walk again, that he might Al-tosiyf kachaTo, that he shall not continue to make sin, and you can interpret that to make accidental sins even anymore. We want to know your name. We want to know the right way before you. Help us as we continue on to stir up new ideas, to bless the memory of everyone in our kahal. And as always, we ask you, Father, for you to protect us from the evil that is waiting outside. Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone. Thank you for coming in. We will have these teachings reposted. We'll have a
Shavua
live
Tov. Bye-bye.
Probably Tuesday night.
Bye-bye.
I'll go live with this.
Okay.
If you have a comment, if you want to
Thank you
say
so much.
Rabbi.
You're welcome.
Thank
Shavua
you.
tov, Tam. Shavua tov, kulam. All right, catch you all later.
Thank you so much.
Very welcome.